Let me touch on one more thing about the accounting equation. As I mentioned before, the accounting equation is assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. Now, we know that assets are anything that's owned or controlled by the business that we expect to sacrifice in future periods in the revenue earnings process. And we also know that liabilities are financial obligations or debts that the business has entered into where they owe someone money. Okay. But what's owner's equity? Well, do not confuse owner's equity with owner's capital. Those are two entirely different things. Owner's equity, I think it's in taxonomy. Owner's equity would be considered the genus, in the same way that asset is a metacategory or a genus, and liabilities is a metacategory or a genus. And if you notice, like assets and liabilities are comprised of what they call species or subcategories. Well, the same is true with owner's equity. Owner's equity is a category, and it's comprised of subcategories of accounts. Okay? And one of which is owner's capital. What I'm getting at is owner's equity, that's the category. Owner's capital is an account that falls under the umbrella of owner's equity. Owner's equity is kind of a hodgepodge collection of everything that's not an asset and not a liability. So we're talking about revenues, we're talking about expenses, we're talking about contra revenue accounts like sales discounts and sales returns on allowances. We're talking about gains and losses on the disposal of property, plant, and equipment. We're talking about petty cash overages and underages, markdown on inventory due to obsolescence. Pretty much everything that is not an asset or a liability is an owner's equity account. And here's where things get kind of funky. As a general rule of thumb, when you're talking about an asset, if you want to increase an asset account, not a contra asset account. If you want to increase an asset account, you debit the account. As a general rule of thumb, if you want to increase a liability account, you credit the account. These are general rules. There are exceptions. But when it's owner's equity, it can be either way. There are some owner's equity accounts like revenues, sales, gains on the disposal of property, plant, and equipment, petty cash overages that you're going to credit to increase. There are other owner's equity accounts like cost of goods sold, salaries expense, taxes, tax expense, interest expense, all your expenses, your losses on the disposal of property, plant, and equipment, loss on markdown of merchandise inventory due to obsolescence, petty cash shortages. You're going to debit those accounts to increase them. So what I'm getting at is when it comes to owner's equity, there are really no hard and fast rules when it comes to increasing or you gotta know you gotta know the account that you're dealing with. Okay. The rule of thumb that I tend to follow is if it's not an asset and it's not a liability, it's probably an owner's equity account. But like I said, there are exceptions. Prepaid expenses. That's a current asset. But it's got that word in there, expense. Expenses are owner's equity accounts. So you'd expect it, it's not. And the other thing is, prepaid expense, that's a permanent account. Revenue and expense accounts, markdown on inventory due to obsolescence, petty cash shortages, overages, and gains and losses on the disposal of property, plant, and equipment, those are all temporary accounts that you zero out at the end of the year. Just something to bear in mind. So when it comes to owner's equity, boy, it really is a hodgepodge. Okay, you got temporary accounts, you also got permanent accounts. One such permanent account is the owner's capital account. Owner's equity now, owner's capital. Owner's capital is an account. Owner's equity is a category. So let's say I'm starting up my sole proprietorship and I've got $1,000 in cash and $20,000 in a truck that I want to contribute to the business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to debit cash, which is an asset account for $1,000. I'm going to debit truck for $20,000, and which is an asset account. And then I'm going to credit an owner's equity account called Owner's Capital, Mike Keister, for $21,000. That's a permanent account. Okay? I do not zero that out at the end of the year. It's a permanent account in the same way that the cash account is a permanent account, in the same way that the truck account is a permanent account. Okay? So, like I said, when it comes to owner's equity, you just got to know your accounts.